Adam Rich is with us here live, and he says, what are the pros and cons of an increasing number of talent using a private tour bus? Does JBL with the bus concept was more prevalent? In previous? Okay. I don't really know what that means, but I know these days a lot of talent we're making house shows and loops and things like that on the tour bus. It does feel like in more recent years with house shows sort of disappearing, that it might not be as necessary. But I know for a guy like Big Show, man, just conventional air travel and car rental travel had to suck. So I totally get the use of a tour bus. Did you ever have a bus? What was the perception of those who did have a bus? Do you think a bus is necessary now with the reduced schedule? Talk to us about bus stuff.
Buses came in right when I was getting out. And no, I never had one. And I don't think I wanted one. I mean, there were some guys that were starting to get one. I just kind of enjoyed being around the guys, and girls. I enjoyed being around the crew and I didn't mind getting a rental car and staying in a hotel. It wasn't that important. I'd been traveling my whole life, so it wasn't that big a deal. But the guys that have it, it changed things for those guys. I mean, especially guys that were on the road a lot late. I mean, that's such a great way to travel. Cena was one of the first ones to have a bus, and I mean, he was awesome with it. He'd take guys in the bus, from town to town. He was, incredibly generous, as you can imagine. Years later, he said, "Hey, I want to just tell you thank you. Come with me." And so we got on the bus. He had some catering for us. It was me, Michael Cole, and Tony Chimmel, and he had a bunch of moonshine for us. Why, guys? Like this huge Hollywood star. He's this huge wrestling star. He's got moonshine. that his bus driver had brought him, and we drank it. It was horrible, but what a night! But I thought it was great that these guys had these buses. I thought it was wonderful that things became easier for them. We couldn't afford it. We started money started coming better like in 2005, 2006. For most of the guys. Most of the guys just simply couldn't afford it, and then now they're all not all of them. A lot of them are flying private, which is another step. That's the first level of luxury to me. That's really worth it. When you can fly private, that changes your life. I mean, it's a game changer. And for those guys that could do it, their life changes completely. And God bless them. I'm glad they're making so much money. I'm glad they're flying private, and I love the fact that the ones that have the buses, I don't think they need them as much anymore because they're not doing as many live events.
Hey, I do want to ask you about just how and when maybe the income changed. We're not going to get into specifics. I don't want anyone to, be offended or us betray any confidences or anything like that.
Yeah.
But, at the height, if you said you felt like the money started to really change in like 05 and an upward trend, like a top talent in 05, ballpark, what would they have been making, and what would have, say, a middle of the road guy have been making, without naming anyone in particular? Just what was the range and how did it change? I'm just trying to sort of see a before and after as best with firsthand knowledge. Again, not saying what anybody did specifically. And
I don't have firsthand knowledge. I only have firsthand knowledge of my contract, which I won't discuss, but I only have firsthand knowledge. I only have knowledge of what I read off the internet of what guys were making off, either they found tax returns or stuff like that from 04, 05, 06 era. You had a lot of guys making in the $1 to $2 million range, the very top guys. From what I saw online, some making around $3. So I would say 1 to 3 was probably the range is from what I've seen from online. That's not from, I've never discussed my contract with anyone, and no one has ever discussed their contract with me. So I don't know, 100% other than what I've seen online. And from what I've seen now, that number is, 5x what the top guys are making.
So you believe there are guys in the game today who are making $10 and $15 million right now?
If the numbers are right, that's reported. And I don't have, Cody Rhodes has not told me what he's made. Neither has Roman or anybody. I don't know any of that. It's all what I've read online from, reports. And I assume they're right. They seem accurate as far as what the TV contracts are, as far as how much everything has progressed and what other people are making in sports. So it seems to make sense that those guys could be making that.
Was there ever any conversation?
If you go back before that, Conrad, say around 95, guys weren't making anything. The only guys making money were Brett and Taker. And then shortly after that, there still wasn't a bunch of guys making money. Guaranteed contracts didn't come in until around 98 or something like that.
And when you're saying, Taker and Brett, I mean, even then, I don't know in 95 that anybody was making $1 million. I could be wrong, but I mean, you guys were running like high school gyms occasionally on spot shows. So it's hard for there to be, if you're paid on the house, how much money can there possibly be in a high school gym? Not being ugly, just saying that was the nature of the business at the time.
100%. And we had big rosters, big cards. We'd have 8 or 9 matches, and you're running small arenas. You get a $200 draw from Arnie or from Tim, and a lot of times you would owe the company $50 when your paycheck would come due for that day.
God.
So you made $150, but you got a $200 draw, so you actually would owe the company money because you took a $200 draw. So yeah, business was pretty tough back then, and nobody was really making any money. That didn't come in until later. And even then, the downside contracts were not like the guaranteed contracts now. My contract, when I had my best run, I probably made, I think 9 to 10x what my downside was, because I never cared about the downside, because I just believe that you should.
Well, outrun it. Yeah,
you should eat what you kill. And I always thought, if I do well, that Vince is going to pay me. He's a great pay guy, or was a great pay guy. I wasn't worried about it.
Did you ever hear from Vince the methodology, or did you ever understand the methodology of how they got there? Because I love that you laugh when I even bring that up, because that's always been the discussion. I've heard one guy say, well, the promoter would put all the money that they drew at the gate in a bucket, and then they'd throw it to the ceiling, and whatever stuck, they'd split amongst the boys. Silly shit like that. But did you ever hear a methodology at all about, because we've heard like the NWA champion got paid X percentage and blah, blah, blah. Did Vince ever have anything like that you know of?
Yes, of course he did. He had a full methodology, and it was 100% bullshit. 100%. 100%. He had like 29%. I remember the number. It was like went to payroll, not to payroll of like building employees and but talent. I think it's 29% went to talent, and that number may have been legit. I'm not saying that number is not legit, but how that number got dispersed was absolute bullshit. It was Vince. Vince would go through, and I talked to guys who've done payroll, including Mr. Briscoe. And Vince would come through and go, nope, change that to this, change this to this. He would base it upon what he thought guys were drawing, what he thought they were worth, what if the ticket sales that he thought they sold, and where they were on the card. And it was all feel. Now, the amount that you have may have been that 29%, because that's the number I remember. It may have changed over time, but that's the number I remember. But as far as dispersing it, that was all Vince, just feel. That was 100% feel. But he would, to my knowledge, nobody ever bitched about. Well, there were some guys that bitched, but not many would bitch about paydays. Vince was a great pay guy, but best I ever saw.
I have heard through the grapevine that there would be talent who would complain and say they felt like they got shortchanged and they felt like they deserved more. And more often than not, that was corrected. Do you remember there being a habitual complainer or someone who maybe did it to the point where it turned Vince off? I don't have to name a name, but I'm just asking.
I do. I know. Yeah, and I won't say the names. I know specific names that guys went to Vince and said, this is bullshit. I should have got paid more. And Vince paid them more. And I don't know if there was any animosity going forward. I was there with them afterward for a couple of years. There was no punishment that I saw that Vince thought they beat him out of money. Vince, for whatever reason, agreed with it. And everybody that I heard of that went to Vince that argued about money, Vince, they got pretty much what they wanted, or they got more money. Vince was really good about that. If you had a reason to say that you were deserving of more money, then Vince would agree with it, and he'd pay you. Vince was a great pay guy. We go around the country and we'd pay. We had old wrestlers that came around all the time, and Gerald Briscoe was the one that took care of them. I mean, guys that hadn't worked in 20 years, and Vince would say, "Be sure and give that guy $1,500, give that guy $2,000, or whatever else." And sometimes Jerry would get money. He goes, "No, give him more than that." And Vince would tell him, Vince paid a ton of guys. Extra guys like that, old wrestlers that were just kind of down on their luck, which nobody knows about that stuff.
I've heard the same thing too, that Vince had a lot of charitable stuff that he didn't want anybody to know about that he took care of. But I do want to ask, because you said, hey, I didn't know what anybody else was getting paid. I never disclosed what I was getting paid, yada, yada, yada. I appreciate that. It's very old school. But I have to assume that when you were trying to break into the WWF, or when you were first getting there, everyone had in their mind's eye, man, when this company was on top, and respectfully, it wasn't when you first joined in 95.
Oh, terrible.
When this company was on top, within the last 10 years prior, Hulk Hogan was the man. Mm-hmm. And you just know that Hulk Hogan probably made the best made the most money. Now, obviously, you never were his accountant and you didn't do his taxes or anything like that. But I find it hard to believe that the boys weren't doing a whisper campaign saying, "Man, when Hogan was here on top, he made blank." Did you ever hear a number like that, whether it's fictitious or not? That conversation had to happen, right?
It's a great question. And no, I never heard it. I never heard somebody say about how much Hogan made. I heard them say about how much, maybe like certain house shows, Hogan made this for a house show or something, or they made this because they were on Hogan's show, right, as compared to another, because when they ran 3 shows, you wanted to be on Hogan's show.
Right.
Just like back in the territory days, with any hot person, you want to be on Dusty or the Rock and Roll Boys, either one, shows down in the Carolinas. And, guys really wanted to be on the Hogan show because they're making so much money. And guys would tell sometimes the difference between money between, say, the C show, the B show, and Hogan show.
We've heard, Jim Ross say, he took a lot of pride in handing Steve Austin $1 million check for 1 quarter's t-shirt sales. It was in excess of $1 million. So we know that the merch opportunity just went crazy. And we've all heard like the Iron Sheik story of when the LJN action figure first launched, that he got this big royalty check for like 80 grand for a quarter or something, just for the figure. As a reminder, the Hulk Hogan figure had to beat up somebody. So why not the mean, nasty, dirty foreign heel or whatever they positioned him as? But I wonder, in that prime era of either the golden era or the attitude era, it just feels natural that everyone on the roster would have some sort of a goal of, hey man, I hear so-and-so's making that much money and that's my new goal. Did wrestling never really work like that? And I'm just way off base, because in sales, that is what people would talk about. Oh, here's the record. This guy on this month and this quarter, this year, man, he blew it out and he sold more than anybody and he did this. And that motivates the rest of the sales guys to say, yeah, that's my new goal. I want to beat that and I'm going to do more than you and blah, blah, blah. I know there is some competitive juices within wrestling, but I just find it hard to believe that nobody ever even freestyled what they thought someone would be making.
I think it was more they wanted their spot.
Yeah.
Then they were speculating necessarily on what they were making, because people knew what they were making and people kept that pretty confidential. Guys just didn't tell each other what they were making.
Sure.
You may have told your tag team partner.
Right.
I don't think me and Ron ever discussed what we were making. We just assumed we were making the same. If Ron had asked, I'd gladly tell him. But we never did. I think guys wanted certain guys' spots. They knew that, to say The Rock or Steve was selling, incredible amounts of that stuff. It was unbelievable. It was the first time merch was, selling like crazy. Yeah. Guys wanted to have that spot. For about 3 months, me and Ron, I can't remember what we made. I would tell you if I did. Me and Ron had the number 1 selling shirt for a while was "Don't take this ass whooping personal." Got that from the Harlem Knights, that heavyweight boxer that stuttered.
Oh,
I couldn't believe that phrase wasn't trademarked. They put it out there and it became the number 1 shirt for a short time. And, it was great money, but we wanted to be that. Everybody wanted to be that number 1 seller, but I don't think it was just necessarily, and it may have been, I want to take his spot.
Right.
It was more like, I want that spot. And I don't care who occupied it. I just want that spot for myself.
No, I totally get that. I'm just fascinated by learning about, how the business changed and how it was motivated, because we've always heard, like, for instance, and I know you weren't there, but the legend is out there that the former, I think his name is Kevin Wackles, the real life name of Nails, the WWF character. Supposedly when he had his dust up with Vince, it's about his frustration from a pay-per-view payoff that he had with Boss Man. Maybe Boss Man got a bigger payday than he did, and that led to those physicality problems that ultimately led to Nails being dismissed and all that. Do you think that is one of the examples and one of the reasons why people thought it was maybe taboo to even discuss it in wrestling? Because when it had happened, it ended poorly sometimes?
I think so, yeah. Now we discussed a lot, what was Stan and Doc making and Brody making in Japan.
Right.
It just seemed different to discuss that. I don't know why it felt different, but we discussed, like, these guys are making this X amount in Japan because that's what you can get. But as far as, and you might discuss what you made, somebody made it in a territory just for a few days. So I went to Atlanta, I went to down south, I went to Memphis, and this is what I made. It was great. But a lot of guys keep it to themselves because they don't want anybody to know. Especially if they got paid well, they don't want anybody to know how much they're making, because then all of a sudden it becomes a problem. Now, if you're not making anything, you're bitching about it, that's different. But also, it was embarrassing if you didn't get paid a lot, because you're saying basically I wasn't worth it. So there's a lot of reasons not to repeat what you were making.
No, I totally get it. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. But I do remember what you're saying. Like, I remember watching shoot interviews in the 90s, and you would hear so many guys say, oh, so-and-so was making 10 grand a week in Japan, or so-and-so was making 15 grand a week in Japan. And that's just not what they're saying these days. And I know the business is totally different now, because now you're not really paid on the house. You're paid a guaranteed contract.
Right.
And I think that's great for the families and the performers inside the business. But I do wonder, has it changed the dynamic of wrestling to no longer be paid on the house, John?
100%. I believe that's why there's so many flips and flops, because people aren't worried about getting hurt, because there's guaranteed contracts. I mean,
so the high spots are less risky, because even if you miss time, you're getting paid.
Yeah, you're getting paid.
Yeah.
I mean, we're going out there. We're thinking, if I try to tell guys sometimes, they're doing some crazy some spot show somewhere. You're not under contract. You might think about doing that. You get hurt, you're not working. You got to pay your own medical bills.
Yeah,
that's a real problem. When you're not under contract somewhere. But now these guys are under contract, so I think that's what's changed a lot of how much risk guys are willing to take. Because now, if you get hurt, you're paid. If we got hurt, I remember I got hurt, tore my bicep, I think it was, or something like that. And JR called me and said, hey, you've reached your minimum already. Cause I was taking, my minimum was pretty low. Cause I, always, was never worried about that. And I said, yeah, I know it. So I'm thinking I'm not going to get paid. He goes, Vince and I both have decided to just keep paying you. It was a really cool thing. They paid me. They didn't have to, and they paid me. I don't know if they did that with everybody or not, because I didn't talk about that with everybody else, but they took really good care of me, but they didn't have to. So that's a scary thing when you're sitting there getting paid and you got a mortgage payment, you got a car payment, you got all these things going on, and all of a sudden you get hurt and you've reached your minimum if you're under a minimum contract, or you're not under contract and now you don't get paid. You got no way to pay your bills. And all of a sudden, and your bills are pretty high if you're sitting there at a pretty high spot on some territory somewhere.
SaveWithConrad.com.
Yeah, I'm Justin Gruffin from Knoxville, Tennessee. What got me to Save with Conrad was the 83 Weeks podcast. I really wasn't thinking about getting rid of any debt. I just wanted to cash out some equity in the house to do remodeling. But I did both, so that was pretty awesome. Worked out great. Redid the foyer, built pantry space, and there's little odds and ends when I first bought the house that I wanted to take care of, and we were able to take care of it. So, yeah, paid off 2 cars and some credit card debt. So probably all in all, get $30,000 in that. And then I got some $30,000 more equity out of the house, and still plenty of equity left over. So payment's good. I lowered my interest rate. They're in a much better spot than I was. Super easy. Everybody was great. Very, very awesome people. Francis and Steve were great to work with. They're awesome. Made it for a very easy, seamless experience. I'd probably say all in all, probably $1,000 a month at least. I'm lowered my interest rate, especially the way the interest rates are right now, which is, that's amazing. I'm Justin Bruckman from Knoxville, Tennessee. I saved over $1,000 with SaveWithConrad.com, and I did a lot of renovations with that money as well.
That's number 212, non-equal housing lender. SaveWithConrad.com.